around next February, but you can adopt those immediately now. So what we basically take a look at are those use cases that are ready for final review, that we've gone through, and yes, we've agreed these are the changes. Use cases that are in progress or ones that have just been submitted. We might take a look at the use case submission process at the end as well. For those who aren't familiar with where this is at, that's the location there on GitHub where the open source community is and where the use cases can be submitted. There are 3 different what are called repositories there. One is the CEDS Collaborative Exchange, and that one is more just for code, so small amounts of code. So as stakeholders adopt the use of CEDS's physical structures, they're going to begin writing queries or writing code or building reports against the CEDS physical database structures. And as they do, they can take that code and give it out and deposit it in what's the CEDS Collaborative Exchange. There's nothing in there presently, but there are some things being worked on that will go in there that can be used by stakeholders who have physically adopted CEDS. So it's just a way to speed up the ability to extract data from your local systems. So there's a lot of state education agencies that have CEDS that's installed, and so this provides a way for them to share code to pull data out of their own systems and give it to someone else who can pull it out of their system. The other 2 are where changes are made. So the IDS, or the Integrated Data Store, is the actual physical structure of CEDS, one of the physical structures, and the CEDS elements is just like you would expect elements. It's just the list of 1,700 and however many elements CEDS has in version 8, and then as we add new elements, that number will increase. And so that's where we take advantage of, or we make modifications to elements by adding new elements, new defined elements, and we'll expect that number to rise rather rapidly over the next year or so, with a lot more elements being looked at by a lot more stakeholders being added into CEDS. So those are the 2 repositories there. Another one is to come, but Michigan and Generate and CEDS are working on that one still, and that is the data warehouse. And so at some point that will be released. But there is a joint process taking place with Michigan, like I said, the state of Michigan, State Education Agency. Actually, it's CEPI in Michigan, and the Generate team, and then also CEDS to jointly release a CEDS data warehouse into there, but it's not been released yet. And when that is, that will also be a repository there. That'll be a 4th one. So what I want to do now, and Andrea, we can switch over to the screen share, is we're really going to just go over to the GitHub site and start taking a look at some of the use cases that have been put in. And this is where the whole point of the call is to have discussions and to get your input. And so feel free to chat away on any of these. The first thing I will do, it should be shared now. So this is the CEDS open source community here. You can see the repositories I mentioned. The elements is the first one, and then the IDS and the collaborative exchange. We're going to go into the elements repository, and anyone can get an account on here if you don't have one. You would just go and you would go to github.com and create an account. There are free options for GitHub, and there's paid for options for GitHub. For anything you would do with CEDS, you do not need to pay for the GitHub account. You would just get the free account. And then that lets you actually go in and take a look, actually lets you submit use cases and comment on them. Anyone can see the CEDS site, even without an account. You can see everything there. But if you want to be able to get emails to follow certain use cases, or if you want to be able to comment on a use case, or you want to be able to add a use case, then you would need an account. And the location, as it shows up here, is github.com/CED standards. So when you go into a repository, what the use cases are where it would say issues right there. So as we're in the CEDS elements, if we go and we click on issues, that's going to show us all of the present use cases that we have that we're taking a look at. It's hard to see. You should, oh, there's a comment. If it's hard to see, you should be able to click full screen at the top and see it larger. Is one thing. You inside of your own Adobe presentation, you should be able to have a place where you can make the whole screen larger. And okay, just seeing comments come in. So these are the use cases. If you wanted to add a use case, you would click on New Issue, and if it's a bug, like something tiny like a misspelling, you would do that, but otherwise you would add a CEDS element, option, or use case, get started, and then you would fill out the template here, title it with something, and then you'd go in and fill out the template and then submit the new use case. If you want to comment on a use case, if you have opinions on certain things, any one of these provides a way down below. If you're logged in, this would be you, and then you can leave your comment there, which provides us more information or detail about a particular use case, which is very helpful as we're going through, because it gives us insight into individuals who may know more about this particular use case or have opinions on it. And we definitely want to hear from you as you review use cases or as you're taking a look at the need for elements. And at any point, you can subscribe or unsubscribe to certain use cases, or you can actually subscribe to the entire thing, so you see all the information about all of the use cases. So if I'm in here, you can see I'm actually watching the entire thing. So anytime anybody issues anything about anything related to CEDS, I'm watching all of those use cases come across, which means I'll get emails on any changes made. But you can actually do just issues only if you want. So if you're watching the whole thing, then you're going to get every email about things that change there. If you aren't watching the whole thing, then you can individually specify one particular use case that you want to watch, and then you'll get information on comments made there as well. Okay, so let's start taking a look at some of these. This one actually just came in a couple hours ago, so we haven't had time to really triage it yet, but just to give you an idea, I saw it come through. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a TC Innovation Network, has a project crosswalk, relevant data specifications, IMS Global, PEST, HR Open, Credential Engine, others. And so they're using CEDS as actually the common spine for all of that, kind of like the Rosetta Stone. And then they've placed that in the Google Sheet here, and there are certain terms that show gaps in CEDS coverage, and so it's things we can look at to possibly add to CEDS. So
we have Doris has raised her hand.
Yep. Doris has raised her hand. Go ahead, Doris, if you can talk.
I can talk. You can just ask anyone who knows me. I didn't actually intend to raise my hand. I was trying to figure out what that was. However, I do have a question. When you sign up to watch something, is there a way to indicate you just want like a digest of everything instead of every time somebody touches it, you get another email?
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to that one. I think it's all or nothing on GitHub for watching like this repository. There's not a lot of traffic that comes through anyway, presently. I'm not saying that won't change in the future, but I don't know that if there's a digest. Andrea, we'll just take a note on that one and see if we can find out if there is a way to digest just certain things as opposed to having anything that actually happens.
Okay, no good.
That'd be good. So yeah, if I can find that out, we will let you know. We'll let everyone know. We take that as an action item. So this is an example right here, just one of those which we haven't had time to triage yet to go in and start taking a look at that. I'm going to skip this one because I know the post-secondary work group that's working on this is going to add some other things. Before I go in to start taking a look at some of these and asking your opinions, is there anything that anyone on the call in particular would like to discuss? And actually, before we do that, Nathan Clinton has actually put a link inside the chat about how to set up a digest on GitHub. So there's a link there to actually answer the question. So thank you, Nathan. Before I go looking through these, is there any particular one that anyone on the call has interest in discussing right away? And I'll give you a second or two to either put it in the chat or to just unmute and let us know. Otherwise, we'll start walking through.
This is Doris again, and I had a bunch of people look at the information on the school psychologist change. I also asked them to look at the K-12 pre-K stuff, but I haven't gotten feedback on the pre-K. Anyway, back to school psychologists, one of the concerns that was raised by multiple people was using the same data source or data element to actually be collecting two different things. And they wanted to know how you normally deal with that. So if you have a change in an element that takes its definition from one thing to another, how do you usually deal with that?
Okay, so that's a good question. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and discuss this one. What we're looking at is EdFacts has, this is really, it's K-12 staff classification, and if I'll go into there real quick, let me go grab K-12 school, and that's not what I want. I want K-12 staff. No, this is going to be, there we go, K-12 staff classification. So it's basically looking at what is this K-12 staff. Are they an administrator? Are they behavioral specialists? Are they elementary teachers? Are they kindergarten teachers? Are they paraprofessionals? And then it has this one little extra one here, almost sort of an other, but not really. It's a defined other. So student support services staff. EdFact pretty much defined this and defines the definitions related to it. What they have done is inside of here, there is no school psychologist, but the EdFacts report has now decided to say we would also like to begin collecting school psychologists. And so this is how they defined it. There's a description, school psychologist, and then professional staff member who provides direct, and then there's a bunch of other things. And so the code is school psychologist. That's relatively easy. It's not in the list. It's a new person. EdFacts wants to collect it. That's really not a problem to add that one in. The change that they've made, however, is that for, scrolling back down here, student support services staff, they have removed psychology from the definition. And they've created a new option called student support services staff without psychology. They've deprecated this student support services staff and then created a new one called student support services staff without psychology. What we're trying to figure out from the CEDS perspective is what happens if next year or the year after they decide to add in audiology. Will it become student support services staff without psychology or audiology as a new element, or if they decide to add in transportation workers into their own area, or actually this is actually not even included here anymore. I think they removed that one. They have included coaches, though, in the new definition, and so they may next year decide to take K-12 staff classification and add coaches into here, in which case would they create a new element called student support services staff without psychology or coaches. So what we're trying to figure out is, do we go with what EdFacts has done with this somewhat generic element of student support services staff, or do we just cut out anything related to an actual identification of a job, like psychologist, speech pathology, audiology, and instead go with a definition that would look more like, I don't think we've actually got it listed in here, but I was looking at a way to do that. It just removes all of that and then gives you a definition that says these are support services staff. So I'll let other people talk about what they think. Go ahead.
Beth Young had raised her hand. Beth, can you speak now? She's having trouble getting her microphone to work.
Okay.
She wanted to speak on this. I'm not seeing where it's letting her, though.
Well, she's doing, I think Doris might have had some thoughts too, or or others around, if it was around what to do possibly with student support services staff. Typically, we would deprecate it and add the new one, especially if it's just with EdFax. But with this one, there's some concern because there are so many staff listed that instead of deprecating, we just modify the definition and then, know that it's related to other years. That it's based on years whether psychologist was included in there, because you really don't know whether psychologist was even one of the support services staff members. Even last year, you don't know if they were one, if the school didn't even have one, or did have one, or did not have one. So it's almost like an other category.
Right, and I'm just reading back through my notes from our personnel specialist and also our reporting people. They are much more inclined to support going with a specific school psychologist code. And then if you want to just leave the current one as general for right now, and then as they decide they need more specifics, pull those out too.
And Beth is typing her
Right.
comments into the chat, so just want to direct everyone to that.
They won't change again next year, right? It's every 3 years, so they won't be like, well, next year they're going to do coaches. So, but in 3 years, they could pull coaches and audiologists out. So she says, yeah, it was a big deal. Received hundreds of comments supporting making the change, which would be adding in the school psychologist. Agree it's a good discussion of CEDS implementation issue. So from an implementation standpoint, we would be looking at just continuing to use the student support services staff element to report for that field, and then it'd be based off of years. So if it's prior to the change, it would be student support services staff. If it's after the change, it would be student support services staff without psychology. So regardless, CEDS would call it student support services staff. And given that these are EdFax specific, it would almost make sense to stay with EdFax and just continue consistent with what they have. But there's also no other K-12 staff classification where you start looking at roles that different staff take. This is the only element for that. And so there's use of this beyond just EdFax reporting. And so it would definitely pull out, Marlene had some comment, pulling out school psychology as its own element. We're definitely going to pull out, not definitely, you guys decide if we don't want to do that, but we need school psychologists as its own element for EdFax reporting because it is its own element inside of EdFax. We also have, I have listed here pre-kindergarten teachers. That's its own element inside of EdFax, and that's one probably CEDS just missed in recent years, that it should be its own. It has its own definition in EdFax. It has its own description. So really the main question that we're struggling with is just what to do with the student support services. If we remove all references to all other staff members, then we could just continue on with the student support services staff element, but we would take out anything related to an actual job title. What are your thoughts, everyone? Any other thoughts on this one?
This is Marshall Hancock. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. If we lose job titles, we lose the opportunity to, in the future, meet regulatory requirements on different types of verticals. By allowing for titles, allowing for the identity and the roles both separately be identified, then if we had one for school resource officers, or maybe in the future there's going to be a public health officer at the school navigating communicable diseases. So if we build in advance the capacity to verify identity and verify the role, then we have an evergreen system. If we fail to put in the capacity to identify roles, then we lose the options to, through metadata tags, be able to do future or even current segments of data that currently are siloed. So this could also include Title I components. It could include special ed. It could include free or reduced lunch, or something as the world changes and we're dealing with communicable diseases and health and safety things in a different way this year versus 5 years ago. It means we're evergreen.
So yeah, I do see this list expanding over time, becoming, there's several roles in here, but the K-12 staff, there'll be other staff, as you mentioned, that would eventually be added, and they would be added in here. It may not be something that EdFax collects, but it would be something that others would collect. Definitely at the LEA level, having more classification of staff and the role that they actually play in the school is what we would see this element expanding out into. Right now there's kindergarten teachers, but there could be first grade teacher, second grade teacher, as you mentioned health specialist or whatever the role is you said.
Yeah,
public safety. Right, that there's
a real push
roles they
in some states.
Play. Yeah. And this is where it would end up, would be likely in K-12 staff classification to identify those staff members and the specific roles they play.
That's right. It gives us the option then to be role-based identity, role-based security, and role-based data governance, which is incredibly helpful for everyone in the education space.
What this element does here, the student support services staff, is it acts as a catch-all for those that have not yet been defined. So this is professional and supervisory staff that providing non-instructional services to students. So if we stopped right there and just said professional and supervisory staff providing non-instructional services to students, that's what student support services staff is. We would leave out including attendance officers, staff providing health, psychology, speech pathology, audio. We took all of that out. We won't be specifying any sort of role in just this element. So it acts as, which is how EdFax is using it now. It's a catch-all for those that they have not yet specifically defined. It's professional and supervisory staff that provide non-instructional services to students. It used to include psychology. Now it doesn't. So if, as CEDS, we take out the including and just throw away all of this, it will continue to act as a catch-all for anything not defined up here. And it would just remain student support services staff. So that's, I think, the question on the table is removing the include, everything after including, being specific about the first part of the definition, but removing everything after including. Including. I think we got some good notes on this, so if there's other thoughts, feel free to type them in the chat. But that's kind of one of the ones we're wrestling with right now. We're leaning toward just adjusting the definition and leaving the element as is. But actually adding in school psychologist as its own role, and then adding in K-12 or pre-kindergarten teachers, but then leaving this as is for the element name and adjusting the definition is where we're presently leaning. So if you have thoughts to the contrary, certainly add those in the comments for GitHub, or email me or CEDS and let us know on that one. So that one we've gone over. Are there other ones that, because that was one that was brought up by the call. I would rather discuss what you all want to discuss, but let me know if there's something else you want to discuss. We'll move on. If there's other things, feel free to jump in, just interrupt me, and then also, or write in the chat. Use program. The next one here is to use the program participation date. This one's relatively simple, and I'll just ask if there's any thoughts to the contrary. But in CEDS, I'll show you what the issue is here. Let me close this and go up here. In CEDS, we're trying to standardize the element names. And so you can see for English learner, there's a status, and then there's a program participation start date and a program participation exit date. There's also an English learner exit date. If you look at Title I, there's the indicator whether they're Title I or not, when they started in the program, when they exited the program. So program participation start and exit. If you look at migrant, there's a migrant status, whether they're migrant or not, a program participation start, a program participation exit. It's consistent across all of the programs that there's a program start and program exit. For English learner, however, we seem to have this leftover English learner exit date. And there's really not a need for that. And so the recommendation is to just deprecate that in favor of using program participation start and exit for all programs and remove anything specific like that. Is there any thoughts around that one? Presently, I would say presently in the CEDS physical structure, there is no English learner exit date. There's only program participation start and end. This element doesn't even exist in the physical CEDS structure. So it's really just a matter of terminology and removing that one. Yep.
Dwayne, the only thing I could think of for that would be with the English learner, there's the active English learner where they're receiving active support, and then there's forwardly English learner where they're followed for, I think it's 3 years. And that might be what that exit date is supposed to be, is when they leave the actual active English learner support. But I don't know.
Yeah, the definition we have here, the year, month and day, a student classified as English learner exited the English learner program. So as far as the definition of it originally, it was to indicate leaving the program, which would be similar to the program, the year, month, and day on which a person ceased to participate in the program. I'm not sure if we have something. I know we have things related to progress. That's Perkins. No, it's just moving on to progress. So the year, as far as the years and tracking the year 1, year 2 out of the program, I would assume that would be based off the date it'd be calculated. But that's a good one to follow up on. We'll have notes on that. Take a look. Other comments we have coming in from Jan, it makes sense to remove English learner exit date. Another one from June McGinnis, I would agree with what was just said. Are they the exit year 1 and exit year 2 when they are just being monitored? So the monitoring, as I would understand it, through the use of CEDS elements would be to look at the exit date, and then you would know based off of the exit date, this is the year 1 of monitoring, this is the year 2 of monitoring. There's not a tracking, there's nothing in CEDS presently that indicates year 1, year 2, year 3, whatever. I think it's just 2 years. I might have changed that. Back when I was in Oklahoma, there were just 2 years. But year 1 and year 2 of monitoring would be based off of just this one date, the exit date. If there's a need for something additional, that'd be something new to add to CEDS. But these have the same meaning. English learner exit date and program participation exit date both indicate an exit from the program, which is why we're considering deprecating English learner, because it seems to have the same meaning as the program participation exit date. I'll give a second or two to see if there's other comments on that. But good comments around. Okay, I'll skip on to the next one. We're going to, well, we'll look at this one. This was the National Defense University actually submitted with this use case. And what they're looking at is military active student indicator, an indication the student is currently serving on active duty in the National Guard or in reserve components. And the option is active, not active, active, and unknown. And they indicated there's no way to delineate whether a student is a member of the National Guard or member of the service's reserve force. With the current option set, members of the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard are considered part of the reserve components. So they're proposing adding a value of guard and not active be changed to reserve. So we are actually, this one's going to take a lot more work. If this is something you would want to be involved in, we've had discussions around military and all the military elements for quite a while and would like to redo how we have military set up inside of CEDS. So there's not a lot, but there's several structural changes we'd like to make around how military is set up, and this is just one example. So if that's something you would be interested in, to email me, and I'll have my email up at the end, or you can indicate it in the comments. Or you can even come into this and just say, leave a comment on the GitHub site. I'd like to be involved in discussions around redoing the military elements. So I'm not going to hang out on that one too much longer because there's not much to discuss, because we need to look at an actual redesign of all of the military elements. The other one they submitted was adding Space Force because it's an actual military branch now, and adding that to the military branch. That one seems pretty straightforward. If there's any kind of thoughts on that, I'll take those now. But it seemed fairly straightforward. We have military branch. It's legislation's passed and approved now that it's an actual branch, so it seems pretty straightforward. Any thoughts on that one? Doesn't seem like there's any. This one I have not delved into as much yet. So K-12 staff professional development. We need to dig into this one a little more, and I think Marlene might be on the call. So listing the proposed elements, we have K-12 staff professional development career education plan type, which is an indication of whether a student completed individualized guidance or counseling plan. And the thought is it seems to be in the wrong domain. Should it go in the student domain? So K-12 professional development career and education plan. Out of here. And am I missing it? Oh, plan type. There it is. Go back over. So thoughts on this one? It is in K-12 student, and I'm just wondering if this is not an indication of an opportunity where a teacher becomes a student. Is that how others would read into this? But there's a career education plan for a CTE student. We also have it for EL staff professional development. We have it for K-12 staff, K-12 student academic record, and K-12 student individualized program all contain a career education plan type. And I'm wondering if this is an instance where the individual itself becomes a student. And Marlene, the definition says student, I think it should be staff. I wonder if it could be an indication of whether a person completed an individualized guidance and counseling plan. If we change it to or student or staff, if we changed it to that, it would have to cross all of the different domains where it exists. If we change it to staff, then it won't fit anymore within student. But if we did student or staff, it could fit in all of them. Or if we took out student and replaced it with person, it could then once again fit in with all of them. Any thoughts on this? Anybody can feel free to talk, too, because I don't want to just be the only one talking. But you can type as well, because there's 2 people typing right now, it says. Let's go take a look over here at April Student Academic Record. Let's see if I can remember the name of it. Career Education Plan. Yeah, it's the same in the academic record as well. In which case it would be a student from the academic record standpoint. They may have misinterpreted this as the plan for a career teacher. Seems like you're compromised to modify the definition to say person would solve the problem. Somebody indicated person. So, okay, we'll take notes on that one. So it may, because it's confusing, obviously, and the whole point. Go ahead. Somebody gonna talk? I'll take it.
Yep. You can take a sip of water or something. Also wondering if you change it to person, if that's going to help us be able to use it into the post-secondary and workforce arenas as well.
Right, because it's not even listed there, but this may occur at the post-secondary and workforce levels as well. Agree. It's a good idea. And back to Marlene's, originally putting it in there, the whole point of CEDS is to be clear and make vocabulary make sense for definitions. And if it didn't make sense, then that's why we're reviewing it, to make sure it doesn't confuse. And when you're reading about a student inside understaffed, that can potentially be confusing. Staff can be students, so we have to make that clear. But at the point at which they're no longer staff then. So yeah, we got to work that out. We got notes on that one. Other thoughts around it? Person may be the solution here, or possibly adding in some usage notes as well. This one doesn't have usage. You can see there's a definition option set, but there's no usage notes. Sometimes we have, I'm going to pick one that's not going to have it, am I? Come on, somebody give me a usage note. I'm not going to find one. Sometimes we have definition and then information, and then we have a usage note, which further helps to clarify when it would be used. But since I'm not going to find any element with a usage note right now, I can't give you an example of it. But that would probably be something good to add as well as a usage note. And Andrea is taking very good notes for me, so write that one down too. So we could possibly add that in to clarify even more related to the definition.
All right.
And we got comment, agreed, the usage note could be beneficial as well. Very good. Okay, so that should cover that one pretty good. Moving back over here. This one's pretty straightforward, unless somebody sees an issue. What it really comes down to is the address. We're limiting the size of address, so anywhere where we have address, if you look at like street number and name, from a storage standpoint in the CEDS physical structure, you can only have 40 characters maximum. And what's being said is that there are street numbers and names, addresses that are greater than 40 characters. So increasing that size. And the other one was the building site number, that there's some building site numbers that aren't just 1, 2, 3, but they may have longer identifiers. And so increasing that from 30 to something greater that would accommodate that. Oh, here's a good one. Thank you, Nancy. Usage notes. So the ISO language code, and there we see it, a usage note actually inside of there. So there's the definition, but then this tells you more about it. That the option comes from this standard, gives you a link to where that's at, information about that. So thank you for that, Nancy. So back over to here. Any objections to increasing the street number, name, the building site number, to increasing the characters for address? You should be allowed to store whatever you want to store.
The area I think that would be helpful is if we could have a place for previous address. There's a lot of issues that happen when something's named, and then maybe it was at this location, but now the name, that place has changed the name, or that person has a previous address. It would reduce a lot of errors in the data if we could also track the previous address, but maybe that's too big of a leap.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that down as a note for looking at that as well. If there's a way, I know that in the physical data structure, a person can have multiple addresses and those are time bound, but I don't know if there's a way in the actual data structure to indicate historical addresses, but I would assume it would just be to utilize this information. I know physically we can do, CEDS physical data model can do previous addresses. So it kind of depends on the use case, I guess.
That's right, but it's just helpful. It's very helpful to have that as an option. It's surprising how many places it's not an option, and then if we only knew that one little piece, we'd be able to have, would be able to resolve ambiguity.
Okay. Yeah, we'll take that down as a note. We have something here for previous address, possibly. We're going to take a look at what Beth's put into here. Type of address listed. Mailing, physical shipping, billing, on campus, off campus, permanent. Possibly something in there for previous address. Because this gives you information about the address, whether it's mailing, physical. There may be a way to incorporate that. So thank you. We'll take a look at that location. Okay. Let's see. We're going to go to the next one here. Work our way through and get some thoughts. We're getting down to some of the other ones. This one's interesting. We're still having discussions around this, the license area, years of experience. What this one really comes down to is North Carolina is collect the years of experience, but related to the credential itself that a person has. So if you would imagine, and this was an example I'd given an email when I was talking back and forth, if you would imagine I worked in fast food, and I worked in fast food for 10 years. And so an employer is looking and saying, do you have fast food experience? Yes, I have fast food experience. I have 10 years of experience in fast food. So they hire me and they put me in the kitchen to work on the grill to cook burgers. I never cooked burgers. I only worked the cashier stand for 10 years in fast food. So I have years of experience, but the credential of burger flipping, I didn't have that. So what this is looking at is tying the years of experience with the actual license area. So I have fast food experience, and I have a credential from McDonald's, let's say. From McDonald's, I have a credential in flipping burgers, in making burgers. I'm a cook. And I have 10 years of experience of fast food, but 3 years of experience in actually cooking burgers. So I'm tying the credential to my years of experience. So you have like a teacher who's licensed, and they may have been licensed as an administrator, and they may have been licensed as a teacher, but they never actually were an administrator. They only did 10 years of teaching and never actually did principal or any other administration. So this is tying the administration or the teaching experience, or what kind of teaching experience, whatever the credential is, to the actual license years. And the ability to look at that and tie those two together. I think we're getting close to having something there as far as an element. Are there any thoughts that anyone has around this? We're looking at this license area, years of experience, or perhaps credential area, years of experience as an element name, and then possibly that. Any thoughts around that, or anybody see a problem with that? I think it seems like there's value in having the experience tied to the credential as well. We have employment years of experience, but not tied specifically to the credential that a person could have. when someone's keying something in, multiple attendees are typing. From a federal reporting perspective, I don't believe there's a requirement in EdFax. There's not a requirement in EdFax. This is really just stakeholders utilizing CEDS and keeping track of different things. So yeah, there's no EdFax requirement around having that information, but it could be valuable information, and it's something North Carolina does collect, and they're looking at CEDS as a physical data store and want to be able to store that in CEDS, the years of experience related to the actual license.
Dwayne, would this be years of experience prior to the current position?
I think it would probably need to be, yes. I don't know how you could do it otherwise. I mean, you could, yeah.
Updated every year.
Would have to break it somewhere. Like there's got to be a stop to it. So there has to be a defined indication of the years of experience. Because a person could be in a currently employed in that area for 3 years. So the question would be, is it include in current employment or previous employment? Or does it include everything up to the year, in which case they'd change it each year and add to it. So that would have to be defined out, but be specific. That's probably the easier part. Maybe that's not the easier part. Jan Kine's got a comment in, I understand the distinction, but I'm wondering how one would have clean data on these data points. I guess whoever requests the element would have a need for it. Yeah, that's the key. Not everyone would have that data. If they have the data and they need to store it, then great. We have to have a place in CEDS for that type of data. And if they're able to get that specific, that could actually be some very useful data to be able to actually know the years of experience related to the actual credential a person has. That would be every employer's dream with hiring people, if you could actually know what they're credentialed in and how many years of experience they actually had doing that particular area. They could hire specific people in. Other thoughts? Get back out of this one. If there are, feel free to chime in. Going to, let's see if there's other ones I want to get to real quick. I will mention this one. We have only about 10 minutes left. The forum comments on exit or withdrawal type. We're going to have a meeting next week, so that'll be announced out. We'll send that out to everyone in the Using CEDS community. We'll get an email about when that'll be. We'll have additional discussions around changes possibly in the exit codes. Some of the recommended changes are listed inside of here, creating some new options, deprecating some options. You can read all of that. There's documentation here that you have access to see all those. But we will be having a discussion around that with the forum and then anyone else that wants to join. We'll send out an invite for when that's going to be next week. We're trying to get that scheduled with the forum still. Where else do I want to go? I'll talk about this one real quick. Organization program type to support early and middle college. We've had several discussions around this with various different groups. We're looking at possibly adding right now one element to CEDS, not an element, adding a type to CEDS, possibly to the organization type, and then to the program type. Likely calling it early college as the actual program type. That seems consistent. Middle college seems to be something that's more historical in nature, and it's actually more along the lines of early college now. And then that would leave the door open should we need a middle college program type. But there'll be more coming out about that shortly, as far as recommendations that everyone can review. And the key to this one is the difference between this, there's dual enrollment where a student takes college courses, and then there's early college where a high school student takes college courses. So in both instances, you have high school students taking college courses, but the early college is more intentional about the outcome of what will occur with that student. So it's, at the very least, there's a program set up where a student is part of an intentional process to obtain college credit, and there's an actual plan set in place for that student. And that's what early college is, versus dual enrollment, where a student takes college courses, but there's not really an actual focused plan. Early college is focused. It could be at the program level. They actually could attend a school that is an early college, which is why we're looking at an organization type as well, to say that this school is an early college, and everyone in that school has an intentional plan to complete a certain amount of credits related to college by the time they graduate high school. So that's something that we're looking at. We'll have some more information about that out there. If you have any thoughts or opinions on it, or want to be a part of any discussions, please let me know. We're getting close to actually probably producing something out of this one here soon, as far as an element and a definition. Naturally, you can look at it and then reject it and have all kinds of opinions about it, which is fine. We want that. But if you do have any thoughts before we start to form a to form an actual element or option set or definition around that, please let me know. We're getting close to that. We've talked with a lot of different stakeholders on this one. Okay, we got like about a minute, so we'll just hit one more of these, and then we will stop. Data shop still has yet to be reviewed, some of those elements. Program entry reason, I'm still waiting for some information about that one from North Carolina. So that, and then I'm still doing some research on homeless primary nighttime residents to see about separating that out. The only other one would be the full-time equivalency, and this one seems pretty straightforward to develop just a full-time equivalency element. We would likely put it on the enrollment, and it would just be a decimal. CIF actually has this already. So if we go to the student school enrollment in CIF, and we were to scroll down, we can see that on the enrollment, they have an FTE, full-time equivalent numeric value of a student's course load during this enrollment expressed in decimal form, where 1 represents a full-time enrollment. I don't know if you can have greater than 1. We may not make that specification. FTE typically goes to just 1, but if a person takes a greater course load somehow where they could have greater than 1.0, that's a possible, so we may not restrict it to a 0 to 1. But it will be a decimal likely, probably called something around full-time equivalency. I know EdFi is working on developing something similar as well. Multiple states have indicated they have the similar thing. Missouri has it, Michigan, Iowa, Nebraska, who actually submitted it, has this. So likely looking at just like a full-time equivalency element that will exist inside of the enrollment of a student. That way it can be at the school level, it could be at the grade level, it could be wherever it would need it to be. We should have something out on that one relatively soon as well. Any comments on that? Michigan does have a few small programs with greater than 1.0, so there you go. There's a reason why we won't restrict it. We'll make it decimal, but not restrict it to being 0 to 1. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Let me go back over to, can you switch my slides back over just so I can put up, Andrea, you're good. I think it's switching. Probably if I quit touching things, I would not be messing it up.
No, I think you helped. I couldn't get the other screen over. Oh, hang on. I can move it out of the way now. There you go. That work?
Yep, okay. So the only thing, I'll just kind of skip past this, is the site's there. If you definitely want to comment on various things, that's where we'll be releasing information as we start to put some of these out for community review. once we're ready, we feel like we have some good definitions in place. We have what the plan is. It'll go out for community review on the GitHub site to take a look at that, and then comment on anything that you see that might need to be tweaked before we actually release it. And then finally, if you do need to email me, if you want to be involved in any other discussions around any of these, just feel free to email me directly, and I'll make sure to set up, times to talk with you about any of those. If you guys have any comments, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm going to hang out here for just a minute or two longer if you want to discuss anything or have other comments to come in. But otherwise, thank you all for your help in developing out the CEDS standard, and have a great day.